The sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Every click of a camera shutter followed him like thunder. The man once surrounded by bodyguards, flashing lights, and VIP entrances was now walking under a completely different spotlight. The cold glare of justice. Sean Diddy Combs entered the courthouse not as the mogul who defined an era, but as a defendant facing the most defining moment of his life. His designer suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders, and even behind dark glasses, the exhaustion in his eyes was clear. The whispers started the second he appeared. Some called his name, others spat it like a curse. But no one looked away. Outside, the streets were chaos. News crews packed the sidewalks, microphones stretching toward the doors as if they could pull out the truth before it was spoken. Protesters chanted, fans shouted. Even the air felt charged, like something irreversible was about to happen. Inside, the temperature dropped. Reporters lined the walls, pens shaking over their notepads. The victims' families filled the front rows, clutching photos, their faces stiff with anger and grief. The same man who once threw million-dollar parties now sat in a wooden chair that would decide his fate, Ed himself beside his attorney, his chains clinking softly against the polished table. The empire he built, the name, the legend, all of it hung in the balance. And as the judge entered the room, silence swallowed everything. Because everyone knew this wasn't just another celebrity trial. This was the fall of an empire happening in real time. When the judge gave a subtle nod, the prosecutor rose slowly from his chair. He didn't rush, he didn't need to. Every movement was deliberate, the kind of calm that only comes from knowing the power of the truth you're about to unleash. He stepped forward, adjusted his tie, and let his gaze sweep across the courtroom. Then he looked straight at Diddy. The tension in the room thickened instantly. "Your Honor," he began, his voice low but firm, "this case isn't about music, fame, or legacy. It's about the people who were silenced while power spoke louder than justice." The words landed heavy. The victims' families straightened in their seats, their eyes locked on him. Even reporters paused their typing. For decades, he continued pacing slowly. Sean Combs lived in a world where his name was untouchable. Money solved problems, lawyers erased mistakes, and anyone who dared to speak out was buried under fear or silence. The gallery murmured. Some nodded. Others looked away, uncomfortable with the truth unraveling before them. "But that illusion ends today," the prosecutor said sharply, "because no man, not even one who built an empire, stands above the law." He turned toward the victims seated in the front row. "These families," he said, pointing gently, "are not here for revenge. They're here for closure. For years they watched the headlines, waiting for justice that never came." Until now, his tone hardened as he faced the judge again. "The evidence is clear. The testimonies are undeniable. This isn't about a celebrity losing his shine. It's about accountability finally catching up." He paused for a beat. The silence after each word felt intentional, surgical. "Power," he said slowly, "is not a shield. It's a test. And today, we'll see what happens when that power runs out." He turned back to his seat, leaving the weight of his words hanging in the air like smoke after an explosion. The courtroom was motionless. The families clung to one another. Diddy sat still, expression unreadable, but his jaw tightened, because deep down he knew this wasn't the kind of storm you could charm your way out of. For a long moment, no one moved. The prosecutor's words still lingered in the air, sharp, heavy, undeniable. Then, slowly, Diddy's attorney, Marcus Hill, stood. He buttoned his suit jacket, exhaled quietly, and stepped toward the center of the courtroom. His expression wasn't angry or defensive. It was calm, almost mournful, the look of a man who knew he was standing between judgment and redemption. "Your Honor," he began softly, "the prosecution paints a picture of a man consumed by power. But I ask this court to remember that behind the headlines, behind the stage lights, behind every accusation, stands a human being." The words carried across the room, gentle but deliberate. The contrast from the prosecutor's intensity was striking. "Yes, Sean Combs built an empire," Marcus continued, his tone growing stronger. "He made mistakes. He hurt people. He failed to see how his success blinded him. But let's not pretend that this man has lived a life untouched by consequence. He has lost everything. His reputation, his businesses, his freedom. What remains is a man stripped bare before the world. Diddy looked down, his hands clenched tight, his face unreadable but tense. Marcus took a slow step closer to the bench. Justice should be fair, not fueled by outrage. Redemption doesn't erase guilt, but it acknowledges humanity. Sean Combs isn't asking to walk away free. He's asking for the chance to make things right. The room stirred. A few heads nodded quietly. The defense attorney pressed on, voice trembling with conviction. This is a man who at his core still believes in giving back. He has built schools, funded scholarships, and provided opportunities for those society forgot. Does that undo the pain caused? Number. But it shows that change isn't impossible. He turned toward the families in the front row, his expression heavy with sincerity. To the victims, you have every right to your anger, to your grief. But mercy doesn't mean forgiveness. It means recognizing that even those who fall the hardest can still rise better than before. A ripple of emotion swept through the room. One of Diddy's children wiped away tears. His mother held a tissue to her lips, trembling. Marcus lowered his voice again. If this courtroom truly believes in justice, then it must also believe in humanity. Punishment without compassion is vengeance, and vengeance is not justice. He returned to his seat slowly, the echoes of his final words settling like dust in the air. The courtroom was divided. Some hearts softened, others hardened even more. But everyone felt it. The battle between accountability and redemption had just begun. The courtroom fell silent again, the echoes of Marcus Hill's words fading like the last notes of a song no one wanted to end. The judge sat motionless for several seconds, hands folded beneath his chin, eyes fixed on the man seated before him. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but it carried the weight of every story told, every tear shed, every truth uncovered. Mr. Combs, Judge Harrison began slowly, I've listened to both sides. I've read every document, every statement, and I've seen the pain this case has brought to everyone involved. What stands before this court is not just a man, but a mirror of what happens when power goes unchecked. His words cut cleanly through the air. Diddy didn't move. His eyes remained downcast, his hands trembling slightly. For years, the judge continued, you were celebrated, admired. You shaped culture, influenced millions, and built something few ever achieve. But along the way, something shifted. The fame, the money, the influence, it all became a shield, and behind that shield, real people suffered.
You could hear someone sniffle softly in the gallery. A reporter's pen froze mid-sentence. The judge leaned forward, his expression steady but unyielding. Justice isn't meant to destroy, Mr. Combs. It's meant to balance. It cannot ignore wrongdoing, but it also must see the person within the punishment. What this court must decide is not just your sentence, but what message it sends to the world that watched you rise and fall. He paused, eyes scanning the room, locking briefly on the families in the front row. To those who lost, I see your pain. Your voices matter. Your wounds are not invisible. And to those who still stand by Mr. Combs, understand that justice doesn't play favorites. It doesn't bend for influence. It doesn't bow to fame. The gallery was utterly still. The sound of a single camera click echoed like thunder. The judge's tone dropped lower, firmer. Mr. Combs, this court expects your next words to be honest. This is your chance, perhaps your last, to speak for yourself. A slow ripple moved through the room. Diddy looked up for the first time, eyes red, lips pressed tightly together. The judge nodded once. You may speak. And just like that, the focus shifted entirely. The power, the pressure, the judgment, it all sat squarely on Diddy's shoulders. What he said next would decide everything. The courtroom had never been so quiet. Even the hum of the air vents seemed to fade away. Every eye was locked on Diddy as he rose to his feet. His hands trembled slightly, but he tried to steady them against the polished table. For the first time all day, he looked directly at the judge. No lawyers to hide behind, no entourage to shield him. Just a man standing in front of the truth. Your Honor? His voice cracked before he caught it. I know I can't change what's been done, but I want to say I'm sorry to every person I've hurt, to every family that's been broken because of me. Each word felt like it cost him something. His eyes darted briefly toward the gallery, where rows of faces stared back, some full of rage, others heavy with exhaustion. I lost myself, he continued quietly. The fame, the power. It made me forget what mattered. I can't ask you to forgive me, but I can promise, if I have any time left, I'll spend it trying to be a better man than the one who walked into this courtroom. He sat down slowly, exhaling as if the air itself had turned to lead. Judge Harrison's gaze didn't shift. His pen tapped the bench once, then stopped. The courtroom waited, the tension pressed against the walls like a storm building behind closed doors. In the gallery, one of the victim's mothers clutched her rosary tight enough to leave marks in her palms. Reporters barely breathed. Even the guards near the door stood perfectly still. When the judge finally reached for the sentencing folder, you could hear the faint rustle of paper like a gunshot. "Mr. Combs," he said, his tone unreadable, "the time for words has passed." The gallery froze. He turned the final page. The seconds stretched, slow and painful. "This court," he continued, pausing for effect, "has reached its decision." Every heartbeat in the room seemed to sink, heavy, sharp, waiting. Diddy's attorney closed his eyes. His mother whispered a prayer. Cameras clicked in rapid bursts. And then, silence. The judge inhaled once, lifted his gaze, and prepared to speak the words that would change everything. The judge's gaze was fixed on Diddy. His hands rested firmly on the bench, his voice measured and heavy. "Sean Combs," he began slowly, "for years you've lived as a symbol of success, an architect of culture, an empire of music, fashion, and influence. But the truth behind the spotlight has caught up. Fame does not erase responsibility. Power does not protect from consequence." The words landed like stone. Diddy blinked hard, his jaw tightening, his lips pressed together to keep them from trembling. "I've listened to the testimonies," the judge continued. "I've seen the pain in the eyes of those you've hurt. And I've heard your apology. But remorse without accountability is only a performance." A faint gasp came from the gallery. The victims' families leaned forward. Diddy's mother gripped her tissue like it was the only thing holding her upright. The judge flipped the final page of the file, his expression still unreadable. "This court," he said, his tone firm and unwavering, "finds the defendant guilty. And it is the judgment of this court that Sean Combs be sentenced to 4 years in federal prison." For one long second, no one moved. The words seemed to hang in the air like thunder that never faded. Then the explosion came. Gasps, cries, shouts. The gallery erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Flashbulbs burst across the room like lightning. Some cheered softly under their breath. Others broke down in tears. Diddy didn't move. His hands fell from the table to his lap. His head dropped forward, and for the first time since the trial began, he looked small. Smaller than anyone had ever seen him. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, but Diddy didn't respond. His mother's sobs echoed from the back row, raw and uncontrolled. His children held each other tightly, too stunned to cry. The judge raised his gavel, the single sharp crack cutting through the chaos. "Order," he commanded. "This court is adjourned." The marshals stepped forward immediately. The sound of the handcuffs locking around Diddy's wrists rang out like metal against fate. His once legendary jewelry was gone. Now the only thing around his wrists were chains. As they led him away, he turned once, just once, toward the gallery. His eyes met his family's. He tried to nod, to offer reassurance, but his lips only trembled. Then he was gone, led down the hallway toward a future stripped of fame, freedom, and control. Outside, the world was waiting. But inside that courtroom, all that remained was silence. The kind that follows when history has just been made. The courthouse doors burst open to a wall of chaos. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted questions over each other, their voices melting into a storm of noise and desperation. 4 years. How do you feel? Do you think it was fair? Will you appeal? But Diddy wasn't there to answer. He was already gone, escorted through a private exit, hidden behind tinted glass in federal custody. Outside, hundreds of people had gathered. Some were fans, crying into their phones, live streaming the moment they never thought they'd see. Others held signs demanding justice, their voices shaking with anger and disbelief. The chants clashed against one another. Free Diddy from one side, accountability at last from the other. Helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights cutting across the crowd. Every major network had cameras rolling. Within minutes, the verdict had gone global. Headlines flooded social media. Diddy sentenced to 4 years. The empire falls. Music mogul faces Judgment Day. Fans in shock after historic sentencing. Clips of the courtroom circulated within minutes. Millions watched in disbelief as the man once synonymous with power and celebration stood silent in cuffs. Hashtags trended worldwide. Celebrities began reacting online, some expressing heartbreak, others calling it justice long overdue. Outside the courthouse, tensions escalated. Supporters shouted at reporters. Victims' advocates spoke through tears, calling the verdict a turning point for accountability in the industry. Security officers struggled to hold the line as emotions boiled over. Meanwhile, networks aired old clips. Diddy on red carpets, accepting awards, standing on top of the world, now replayed like a montage of everything he'd lost. Commentators called it the end of an era, and for millions watching at home, it didn't feel real. This was a man who built empires, launched careers, shaped soundtracks for generations. And yet, in the span of a few sentences, that entire empire had come crashing down. By sunset, the courthouse steps were littered with signs, camera cords, and crushed coffee cups. The crowd finally thinned, but the echoes of their voices, their outrage, their disbelief, lingered in the air long after the cameras shut off. Because this wasn't just news anymore. It was history, and the world was watching it unfold in real time. The roar outside the courthouse slowly faded behind him. Inside the transport van, there was only the low hum of the engine and the metallic clink of chains. The tinted windows revealed nothing. No flashing lights, no crowds, no cameras. Just darkness and motion. Diddy sat motionless, staring at the floor. His wrists were cuffed, his mind racing somewhere between disbelief and resignation. For the first time in decades, no one was around to shape the narrative. No team, no PR statement, no applause, just silence. He tried to steady his breathing, but each inhale came out shaky, uneven. The reality was setting in. Every privilege, every ounce of control, every illusion of power had vanished. Ahead of him stretched 4 years of time he couldn't buy back. Back at the courthouse, reporters were still unpacking the chaos. Analysts debated the impact, some calling it justice, others calling it excessive. Legal experts picked apart every word of the sentencing, while fans on social media turned grief into content. Clips, edits, think pieces, all fighting to define what this moment meant. In the music industry, silence hit harder than any headline. Business partners distanced themselves. Brands quietly pulled contracts. Collaborators who once called him a visionary deleted old posts overnight. The empire that took decades to build was collapsing in hours. One of his longtime producers told a reporter off camera, "You could feel it coming. He just never thought it would catch him." Even those who had benefited from his empire couldn't deny it anymore. The conversation shifted from his success to his downfall, from celebration to consequence. For an entire generation that grew up on his music, it felt like watching a monument crumble in slow motion. Inside the van, Diddy looked up briefly as the vehicle turned down a long, dimly lit road. The courthouse was gone. The city noise was gone. What waited ahead was the cold, quiet isolation of a federal facility. He leaned back, eyes closed, the chains pressing cold against his skin. The echo of the judge's words still rang in his head. Fame does not protect from consequence. And in that moment, the man who once owned every room he walked into realized this was the one place he could no longer command anything. In the days that followed, the shock didn't fade. It spread. What started as a single courtroom verdict became a cultural earthquake that rippled through music, business, and every corner of social media. Major networks ran round-the-clock coverage. Commentators dissected every frame of the trial, every word of the judge's statement. Talk shows debated what it all meant. Was this accountability? A witch hunt? The fall of an icon? Or the price of decades of silence finally breaking? Meanwhile, behind the polished glass towers that once carried his brand's name, everything was unraveling. Partnerships dissolved overnight. Luxury fashion houses scrubbed his name from campaigns. Streaming platforms quietly began reevaluating how to handle his catalog. Even artists who once called him a legend posted cryptic statements and then vanished from the conversation. For years, Diddy had been the blueprint, the dreamer who turned struggle into success, who built an empire out of rhythm and ambition. But now that story was cracked beyond repair. His empire hadn't just fallen, it had been erased. Former associates began to speak publicly, each revealing stories that blurred the line between rumor and truth. People always whispered, one insider said, but no one wanted to believe it. He was too big to fall, but he had fallen, hard and publicly. And in the vacuum left behind, the industry began to shift. Other powerful figures grew silent. Some hired legal teams. Others deleted old photos. The fear was contagious. For fans, it was disorienting. The man whose voice soundtracked their youth was now a cautionary tale. Every hit song, every video, every iconic performance felt different now, like pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit. In barbershops, podcasts, and living rooms across the country, the conversation was the same. If it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. Diddy's name became more than a headline. It became a warning, a reminder of how fast the climb to power can turn into a free fall. And through it all, his silence remained. No statement, no response. Just the sound of a legacy dissolving, one headline at a time. The story of Sean Diddy Combs will be told for years, not just as the fall of a music mogul, but as a mirror reflecting everything fame can distort. What began as the dream of a young kid from Harlem had become an empire that touched every corner of pop culture. But behind the glitz, the private jets, and the headlines of success, there was always something darker waiting to surface. In the end, it wasn't a rival or a rumor that brought him down. It was the truth that no matter how high you rise, there are still lines you can't cross. No matter how many people you inspire, no one is beyond accountability. Inside those prison walls, the sound of fans chanting his name has long faded. The studio lights, the flashing cameras, the endless interviews, all replaced by silence and reflection. Time moves differently there. Each day stretches longer than the last, each moment heavy with the weight of everything lost. And yet, even in the wreckage, there's a strange kind of clarity. The world has changed. The industry has changed. People are paying attention now to what power can hide and to the voices that refuse to be silenced again. Outside, life moves on. New artists rise, new headlines take over. But Diddy's story remains a warning carved into the culture itself. That power without accountability always ends the same way. In silence, in loss, in consequence. Maybe years from now, he'll walk free again. Maybe he'll speak, write, or try to rebuild. But whatever comes next, the truth will never be erased. He had everything, and lost it all. And in that loss lies the lesson every empire eventually learns. The higher you climb, the harder the fall.